In 1922, a 15-year-old boy showed up for his first day of work at a prestigious auto repair shop in Tokyo. He expected to get his hands dirty fixing cars. Instead, the owner questioned his age and fitness for the business and assigned him to clean the workshop and babysit his child. For months, this was his reality. He made no money and did no mechanical work. His entire job consisted of sweeping floors while carrying the owner's baby strapped to his back. At the time, nobody in that shop paid him much attention. They had no idea that this teenager would eventually grow up to own the largest motorbike manufacturer on the planet. That boy was Soichiro Honda. To understand how he went from an unpaid babysitter to the founder of a multi-billion-dollar brand, we have to go back to 1906, to the village where his obsession with engines first began. Tenryu was a poverty-ridden village at the foot of Mount Fuji. Growing up, there was a struggle for survival. The economic conditions were so harsh that Soichiro lost 5 of his siblings to health issues during his childhood. His life seemed set. His father was a blacksmith who repaired bicycles on the side, and it was assumed Soichiro would simply follow in his footsteps. Then, at age 8, he heard a strange rumble in the neighborhood. He tracked the sound until he saw a 1908 Ford Model T. It was the first car he had ever seen, and he was captivated by the fact that it could move under its own power. He didn't think about why he was doing it. He just found himself sprinting down the road, chasing the car as hard as he could run. Engines were all he cared about. He spent his time helping his father with bicycle repairs and ignored his schoolwork so completely that his grades were a disaster. To avoid punishment, he used a piece of rubber to forge his family's stamp on his report cards so his father wouldn't see his marks. He was a child who could repair complex farm machinery, but failed his basic school reports. He possessed a deep, instinctive talent for mechanics, but no formal path to leave the village. At 15, he took a risk. He saw an ad for a Tokyo-based auto company and wrote them a letter asking for work. When he got a positive reply, he left home for the city. Tokyo was a shock. Compared to his village, the city was moving at a pace he had never experienced, filled with more noise and machinery than he could have imagined. But when he reached the shop, the owner, Yuzo Sakibara, had only one task ready for him: babysitting. He stayed because he had to. The only thing worse than the unpaid menial labor was returning home to his parents as a failure. He endured the humiliation for months, waiting until the shop's workload grew so heavy that the owner was finally forced to bring him onto the garage floor to help. Once he started, he climbed the ranks quickly. He used the high volume of repair requests to prove his talent, becoming a trusted mechanic. At the time, cars were not the common sight they are today. They were luxury items, almost exclusively foreign-made, and owned by the upper class. This meant Honda was getting a hands-on look at some of the world's best engineering. He spent his days pulling apart and repairing Lincolns, Daimlers, and Mercedes. Sakibara eventually took the boy under his wing, teaching him not just how to fix the machines, but how the business itself operated. Art Shokai was his university. What he lacked in a formal high school diploma, he replaced with a world-class practical education in mechanical engineering. In 1923, motorsports were gaining popularity across Europe and America, and that same enthusiasm was starting to take hold in Japan. Sakibara decided his team should stop just repairing other people's cars and finally build their own. Their most ambitious project was a custom race car called the Curtiss. It was an unusual piece of engineering, built by scavenging parts from 2 completely different worlds of machinery. For the base, they used the chassis of an American Mitchell automobile. Then, they dropped in a massive engine taken from a second-hand American Curtiss biplane. At the 1924 Japanese Motor Car Championship, the 17-year-old former babysitter wasn't cleaning floors anymore. He was the team's accompanying engineer. The Curtiss took first place. It was a stunning victory that proved their makeshift engineering could beat the field. This victory set a standard for every project Honda would touch for the rest of his career. From that point on, motorsports were his religion, and he had proven that a boy from a poor village could out-engineer the most. In 1946, the landscape of Japan was virtually unrecognizable. Entire cities had been leveled into flat plains of ash and structural debris, throwing a national economy into a total freefall. Citizens faced extreme, immediate shortages of the absolute basics required to live: food, clothing, and shelter. People survived only on whatever meager resources they could secure through strict national rationing. Walking through this devastation was Soichiro Honda. He was a 40-year-old mechanic out of work, having just sold off the bombed-out remnants of his company. His situation was so desperate that he couldn't even secure enough fuel to drive his car to the market and buy food for his family. To understand how this broke, stranded man eventually engineered a global transportation empire, we have to look backward. His career over the previous 20 years reveals a specific pattern, an exceptional ability to build entirely new ventures out of discarded scraps. The pattern started in 1926. A 21-year-old Honda was drafted for military service, but he failed the medical exam because he was colorblind. Excused from the army, his boss tapped him to run a brand new branch of the Art Shokai repair shop in Hamamatsu. Local car owners took one look at his extreme youth and refused to hand over their vehicles. To keep the doors open, he had to accept the complex, cast-off repair jobs that every other mechanic in town had rejected. He applied every piece of mechanical knowledge he had to those difficult jobs. The quality of his work brought in repeat customers, and by the 1930s, with his wife stepping in to help manage operations, that empty shop had expanded into a bustling business with 30 employees. While the shop grew, Honda pursued a dangerous parallel obsession. He custom-built an open cockpit race car from scratch, named it the Hamamatsu, and drove it to a national speed record of 120 kilometers per hour, a record that remained unbeaten in Japan for 2 decades. Then, in June 1936, a violent crash on a track outside Tokyo nearly killed him. He fractured his left arm, dislocated his shoulder, and suffered severe facial injuries. After intense arguments with his father and his wife while recovering in the hospital, he surrendered the steering wheel for good. Stepping away from the track left a void. Fixing other people's broken machines was no longer enough to hold his attention. He decided to pivot, setting his sights on manufacturing his own original automotive parts. He proposed turning his repair branch into a dedicated parts manufacturing plant. His investors immediately shot the idea down. They were making a steady profit from repair work and refused to risk capital on a manufacturing gamble. This diagram illustrates a standard engine block. Ignored by his investors, Soichiro abandoned his successful repair business to partner with a friend and found Tokai Heavy Industry. Their singular focus was developing piston rings, the critical circular metal bands you see here, which seal the combustion chamber inside an engine. He spent his days managing the old repair shop and his nights awake in the research center trying to perfect his design. The intense labor and lack of sleep took a brutal physical toll, causing him to lose so much weight that his face became completely emaciated. Finally, in 1939, he believed he had a working product. He quit the repair shop for good, manufactured 50 of his new pistons, and confidently submitted them to Toyota to secure a supply contract. But of the 50 samples submitted, 47 of them failed Toyota's strict quality control tests. Only 3 passed. This rejection exposed a massive gap in his knowledge. Raw mechanical intuition and endless hours of physical labor were not enough to scale a manufacturing business. To make reliable parts, he needed to master the hard science of metallurgy. He immediately enrolled as a part-time student at the Hamamatsu Industrial Institute. Over the next couple of years, he traveled to universities and steelmaking facilities across Japan, studying the exact chemical makeup and casting processes required for high-grade metal. Armed with this scientific understanding, he redesigned his production process. His next batch of pistons easily passed quality control, and an avalanche of orders poured in from across the country. He rapidly scaled up his operation, hiring around 2,000 employees to meet the massive demand. Then, Japan entered the Pacific War in 1941. The national government placed his company under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Munitions, and the military seized direct control of his factory. The situation deteriorated rapidly. The following year, Toyota absorbed 45% of the company's equity, effectively demoting Honda from president to senior managing director. Soon after, a large portion of his workforce resigned, as they were drafted into military service. In 1944, a direct bomb blast struck the Hamamatsu facility, decimating the factory floor. Any hope of recovering from the airstrike was crushed a few months later in early 1945 when the Nankai earthquake collapsed his remaining plant. Facing total structural ruin and a surrendered nation, he sold the remaining scraps of his life's work to Toyota for 450,000 yen and walked away. While millions of citizens were waking up to the paralyzing shock of having lost everything in the war, Honda had already lived through a constant cycle of building enterprises from scratch and watching them turn to dust. By 1946, Honda's background made him an outlier. 2 decades of building and losing businesses gave him the exact resilience needed to solve a national transportation crisis. One afternoon, he came across a discarded piece of military equipment, a small generator engine used by the Japanese Imperial Army to power wireless radios during the war. This is a blueprint of a standard bicycle frame. Honda realized that if he attached this surplus engine directly to the frame, he could provide cheap, reliable transportation to a society that had almost no gasoline or infrastructure left. The Honda Motor Company grew out of a mechanic's history of survival. His experience with high-speed crashes, manufacturing failures, and direct hits from bombs provided the foundation for an empire. By the late 1980s, Honda transformed from a local motorbike shop into a global manufacturing powerhouse, producing millions of vehicles and rivaling the production scale of the world's most established automotive giants. But if you asked the man who started it all, Soichiro Honda, he wouldn't credit his success to a streak of brilliant inventions. Instead, he claimed his career was built on nothing more than mistakes, blunders, and serious omissions. It is the central paradox of the company. Honda didn't reach the top by avoiding error. They became an empire by mastering a cycle of rapid, disciplined failure. That cycle began in 1946. Japan was economically devastated, and its workforce was desperate for any form of basic, reliable transportation. Soichiro's first move was scrappy and improvised. He took a small surplus of military radio engines he found in a warehouse and bolted them directly onto standard bicycles. The bikes were an immediate hit, but the supply of old engines was finite. When the stock ran dry, Soichiro was forced to engineer his own replacement, resulting in the 1947 Type A engine. To grow, he needed capital he didn't have. He wrote to 18,000 bicycle shop owners across the country, pitching them a practical solution to get Japan moving again. 3,000 of those shops sent back the money he needed to start his first real shipments. That investment funded the Model D, the company's first complete motorcycle. But the bike was a commercial failure. Customers found it too heavy and oversized for practical daily use. With his funds depleted and his flagship product rejected by the market, Soichiro faced a choice: iterate immediately or go out of business. Soichiro responded to the Model D flop by stripping the machine down to its most basic parts, spending 3 years of trial and error trying to make it lighter and more accessible. This was the result: the Super Cup. To scale this new design, Honda partnered with investor Takeo Fujisawa, who provided the financial stability and aggressive marketing strategies the engineering team lacked. In 1958, the Super Cub arrived in the United States. It cost just $295, a quarter of the price of the heavy, expensive machines sold by domestic brands like Harley-Davidson. By solving the weight and cost issues that sank his previous model, Soichiro produced a machine that aligned perfectly with the needs of the American market. With a hit product in hand, Honda looked to the racing world to prove their engineering could compete with anyone on the planet. Their first international race in 1954 was an embarrassment. The bikes finished poorly, and the company's technical gaps were exposed for everyone to see. Soichiro treated the defeat as a research trip. He traveled to races globally to examine, benchmark, and reverse engineer the bikes that were actually winning. The research paid off. By 1959, the team took the manufacturer's prize at the Isle of Man TT, followed by another victory 2 years later. That reputation for speed and reliability fueled massive growth. By 1968, the company had produced its 10 millionth motorcycle. These public defeats on the track provided the raw data necessary to build a brand that could eventually dominate the consumer market. Motorcycles were a success, but Soichiro still wanted to enter the car market, a dream he'd held since he was a child. Japanese officials warned him to stay away. They argued the market was already saturated by Nissan and Toyota, and that Japan didn't need another car manufacturer. He ignored them and released the T360 mini truck and the S500 sports car. Both failed to gain traction, with the S500 seeing a production run of only 1,300 units. It was the Model D cycle all over again. Honda entered a new market, failed, and then turned to Formula One racing to learn how to build a better engine, achieving their first-place victory just 1 year after their debut. In the 1970s, the global oil crisis created a world of fuel shortages and skyrocketing prices at the pump. Honda paused its racing program to focus entirely on applying its high-performance engine research to consumer fuel efficiency. They developed the CVCC engine. It used an optimized fuel vortex, allowing drivers to travel further while burning less fuel. When they launched the 1972 Civic, they paired this efficiency with a catalytic converter to reduce exhaust emissions, something other automakers weren't prioritizing. Honda capitalized on the global crisis to bypass established auto giants, whose large, thirsty engines were suddenly obsolete. The Civic's efficiency was eventually scaled into the larger, more comfortable Honda Accord. The Accord's blend of comfort and fuel economy made it one of the best-selling sedans in history, making Honda one of the largest automakers on the planet by the end of the 1980s. Today, the company applies this same iterative philosophy to jets, boat engines, and complex robotics. Soichiro Honda died in 1991. He left behind a philosophy: mistakes are acceptable, provided they never occur for the same reasons twice.